Kiss me before she sees us." Her voice was low, urgent, almost playful, but her eyes weren't. We were standing too close in a hallway that didn't belong to either of us. I could hear footsteps at the far end. Familiar ones. "That could cost," I started. She didn't wait for me to finish. "Exactly," she whispered. Her hand slid up my chest, not hesitant, not reckless, deliberate. The kind of touch meant to force a decision, not request one. I felt the heat of her body before I felt the consequences lining up behind it. "She's almost here," she added. I could still step back. I could still be the man who chose caution, the man who didn't turn tension into betrayal. Instead, I looked at her mouth. And in that suspended second, I understood something with dangerous clarity. This wasn't about desire, it was about being seen. And if I kissed her now, it wouldn't just be her watching, it would be everyone. Before that hallway, before the urgency in her voice, our connection had lived in something far less dramatic. We weren't lovers. Not officially. Not visibly. That distinction mattered more to me than it ever seemed to matter to her. We belonged to the same orbit of people. The kind of proximity where familiarity grows quietly. Shared rooms, shared conversations, shared glances that linger just a fraction longer than politeness requires. She had a way of standing close without appearing to. A confidence that never felt performed, only inhabited. I noticed it early, then trained myself not to notice it too much. Attraction, I believed, was something adults managed, not something they surrendered to. What complicated everything was the other presence in my life. She, stable, established, entirely real in the way long relationships are real, built from routines, history, mutual recognition. There was no chaos there, no absence of affection, just a structure that had solidified over time, comfortable enough that disruption felt not only dangerous but unnecessary. The woman in the hallway knew about her, everyone did, which was precisely why nothing between us was supposed to exist beyond harmless chemistry. The tension remained coded inside jokes, prolonged eye contact, silences that carried more meaning than words ever could. We never crossed lines. We never needed to. Until something shifted. It happened gradually, almost invisibly. A new ease in her touch, fingers brushing my arm, her hand lingering on my back when she passed, gestures small enough to dismiss individually, impossible to ignore collectively. I began noticing how often she created moments where we stood slightly apart from others. How naturally intimacy formed in those narrow spaces. "You're very disciplined," she once said, smiling in a way that didn't feel entirely complimentary. "Someone has to be," I answered. She laughed, but her eyes stayed on me longer than the joke required. The truth was uncomfortable in its simplicity. Being around her made me feel alert in a way I hadn't felt in years. Not because my life lacked affection or stability, but because novelty has a specific electricity, especially when mixed with the forbidden. We both understood the boundaries. That's what made the tension sustainable. What I didn't fully grasp was how boundaries change once two people begin silently negotiating them instead of respecting them. How desire becomes less about impulse and more about permission. How proximity slowly rewrites what feels possible. By the time we found ourselves alone in that hallway, her request wasn't sudden. It was the natural consequence of months of unspoken escalation. And beneath everything, beneath attraction, beneath risk, was something far more dangerous. The quiet realization that I wasn't simply drawn to her. I was drawn to the version of myself that existed around her. A version that felt less contained, less predictable, disturbingly willing to forget what it might cost to be seen wanting something I wasn't supposed to want. She wasn't wrong. The hallway was narrow, dimly lit. The kind of space designed for passing through, not lingering. Yet there we were, standing still as if time itself had stalled around us. I could hear the distant rhythm of voices from the other room, the soft echo of footsteps approaching. "She's coming," she murmured. Not nervous. Certain. I should have moved away then. That was the rational point. The clean exit. But something about the way she said it, without fear, without hesitation, kept me rooted where I stood. Then she stepped closer. The shift was minimal in distance, catastrophic in meaning. Her body nearly touching mine, her breath warm against my neck. It wasn't seduction in the obvious sense, it was escalation sharpened into inevitability. "Kiss me," she whispered. Not playful now. A command wrapped in intimacy. That could cost. I began again, though the protest already sounded hollow to my own ears. I know, she said. And then, softer, more dangerous. That's the point. The words landed with unsettling force. Until that instant, I'd framed everything as temptation, as chemistry, as something accidental we were both resisting. But her honesty stripped away the last illusion. This wasn't about losing control. It was about choosing not to maintain it. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would betray us before anything else could. I glanced down the hallway, instinctively measuring time, distance, consequence. The footsteps were closer now. Familiar cadence. Unmistakable. She tilted her head slightly, exposing her neck, her mouth inches from mine. No hesitation, no doubt. And I realized then what made the moment truly irreversible. She wasn't asking for affection or passion. She was asking for visibility, for an act that couldn't be explained away, minimized, or hidden behind ambiguity. A gesture designed to collapse every safe version of reality we'd both been clinging to. If you do this, I said quietly, nothing stays the same. Her eyes locked onto mine. Nothing already is. The footsteps reached the corner. There was no more time left for reflection, only decision. And in that compressed second, caught between fear, desire, and the unbearable weight of what would follow, I did the one thing I had spent months proving to myself I wouldn't. I kissed her. Not hurried, not desperate, deliberate. The world didn't explode. But the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. Because when I opened my eyes, she was standing there, watching. She didn't gasp. She didn't shout. She just stood there, for a fraction of a second. My mind refused to process what my eyes were already confirming. The hallway, the woman still inches from me, the warmth of her mouth lingering on mine, and beyond her shoulder, the one person who made this moment impossible. Watching. The silence was unbearable. Not empty. Charged. Every sound in the building seemed to collapse into that single space. Even the air felt altered, heavier, like something irreversible had just been witnessed. I stepped back first. Too late to undo anything. Early enough to expose guilt. Her eyes were fixed on us, but not in the way I expected. There was no immediate explosion of emotion, no dramatic disbelief. Just a strange, devastating stillness. The kind that signals not confusion, but understanding arriving too quickly. I started. Nothing followed. Because language is useless in certain moments, there are no sentences capable of competing with what is already visible. The woman beside me didn't retreat. That detail struck me with sudden clarity. She didn't look ashamed. She didn't look afraid. If anything, she looked composed. Almost resolved, as if this outcome had always been part of the equation. And then I understood. This hadn't been urgency. It had been orchestration. You knew, the woman in front of us said quietly, turning toward her. Not accusation, recognition. The other woman's expression didn't crack. Of course I knew, she replied. My pulse spiked. I looked between them, disoriented. The shape of the situation rearranging itself faster than my thoughts could keep up. She deserved to see, the woman beside me continued calmly. Deserved. The word hit like a physical force, because suddenly the hallway wasn't a coincidence. The timing wasn't accidental. The kiss, the one I had believed was reckless, impulsive, dangerous, had been something else entirely. A reveal. I turned back to the woman I thought I understood, my voice unsteady for the first time. You planned this? She finally looked at me, not tenderly, not cruelly, simply honestly. I needed the truth to stop hiding, she said. The devastation of that realization landed slowly, crushingly. This wasn't a stolen moment discovered by chance. It was a decision staged for visibility. And standing there with both of them now fully aware, I felt something far worse than being caught. I felt the collapse of the illusion that I had ever been in control of what this would become. Everything converged in the same unbearable second. I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since the kiss. The calm in her face was no longer mysterious. It was intentional. She hadn't been driven by passion or panic. She had been waiting. For what? I asked, my voice low, strained. For you to stop pretending, she answered. The woman in front of us, she, let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, though there was no humor in it. Not shock, not heartbreak, something far more unsettling, relief. "That's why you kept pushing him," she said, eyes fixed on her. "Why you never hit it as carefully as you could have." Neither of them were looking at me now. I had become secondary inside my own collapse. "I didn't push anything," the woman beside me replied evenly. "He chose." The word sliced cleanly through the space. Chose. As if this entire unraveling could be reduced to a single act of agency. "You set this up," I said, turning to her, the full shape of it finally locking into place. "The hallway, the timing. You knew she'd walk in." "Yes," she said, no hesitation, no apology. "I wanted the truth visible," she continued, "not whispered, not denied, not negotiated." I felt my chest tighten. "You could have just told her." "She wouldn't have believed me," she replied calmly. "But she'd believe you." The brutality of that logic left me momentarily speechless. The woman in front of us nodded slowly, absorbing something that seemed to settle deep inside her. "You didn't want him," she said quietly. It wasn't jealousy. It was recognition. The woman beside me finally turned toward her fully. "I wanted you to see who you were marrying." The silence that followed was devastating, because suddenly, impossibly, the center of the story shifted. This wasn't a love triangle. It wasn't seduction or betrayal in the shape I'd imagined. It was a confrontation I had been unknowingly placed inside. A collision between two women bound not by rivalry, but by something far more intimate and volatile. History. "You knew each other," I said, the realization landing like vertigo. They both looked at me then. And for the first time that night, they shared the same expression. Exhausted certainty. "She's my sister," the woman in white said. The world didn't shatter. It tilted. Every assumption I'd been standing on dissolved at once. The secrecy, the tension, the forbidden charge I thought I understood. The kiss hadn't exposed an affair. It had detonated a family. "And you," my partner continued softly, her voice no longer sharp but impossibly tired, "were never the secret." I stood there, breath shallow, reality rearranging itself with brutal clarity. The kiss hadn't cost me a relationship. It had been the instrument of a truth far older, far deeper, far more destructive than desire. And I had never seen it coming. No one screamed, no one cried. That might have made it easier. Instead, the three of us stood in that hallway with the weight of years rearranging themselves in real time. I felt suddenly irrelevant inside a history I hadn't known existed. The kiss, what I thought was betrayal, what I thought was passion, had been something else entirely. Exposure. Not of an affair, of fractures. They looked at each other longer than either looked at me. There was something there, resentment, love, competition, unfinished arguments that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with blood. "You didn't have to do it like this," the woman in white said quietly. "Yes, I did," her sister replied. "You only believe what you see." That sentence didn't just land between them. It explained everything. I had been the proof. Not the prize, not the choice. Proof. And suddenly the months of tension, the glances, the calculated proximity, the way she'd never seemed afraid of being seen, made sense in a way that hollowed me out. I wasn't the center of this story. I was the trigger. The woman in white took off her ring slowly, not in rage, not in humiliation, just clarity. She held it for a second, staring at it like it belonged to another version of her life. "I don't want a man who can be positioned," she said. Not to her sister, to me. There was no venom in it, just truth. That hurt more. She walked past us without another word. Her sister didn't go after her, neither did I. We stood there in the quiet aftermath of something that felt less like scandal and more like inevitability finally arriving. "You used me," I said. She didn't deny it. "Yes," she replied. "But you also chose." That was the part that stayed with me. She hadn't forced my mouth to hers. She hadn't controlled my decision. She had simply removed the shadows. In the weeks that followed, the engagement ended. The family fracture deepened before it healed, if it ever fully did. I wasn't invited into that process. I didn't belong there. As for us, there was no dramatic romance that followed, no sudden union forged from chaos. The electricity that had once defined our connection felt different now, exposed, examined, real. Sometimes I think about that hallway, about how close I was to believing the story was simple. Desire, risk, consequence. It wasn't. It was about visibility. She asked me to kiss her before she saw. I did. What it cost wasn't just love. It was illusion. And once illusion is gone, nothing, not even desire, feels the same again.